Elden Ring is widely considered to be FromSoft's crowning achievement, but despite the universal praise for this game, the bosses have been incredibly controversial. From Melania to Radahn and everything in between, there's no doubt it's a more divisive roster than any other in Soulsborne, so today I'll be diving in and ranking Elden Ring's major bosses from worst to best. The full-grown Falling Star Beast is marginally better than the regular. That said, it's still the weakest major boss in Elden Ring. It has a slightly more diverse moveset, though these new attacks don't make it much more interesting to fight. It's janky, its attacks are frustrating to avoid, it deals way too much damage and doesn't take nearly enough, and it's simply a terrible fight, one that I absolutely hate. At least it's slightly better in Night Rain, but still one of the most annoying night bosses to encounter. Many of you are going to be annoyed to not see this boss at the bottom spot. The Godskin duo has frequently been called the worst boss ever conceived. While I don't think it's quite as bad as people say, there's no denying it's an atrociously designed boss fight. I hate the duo being able to revive each other indefinitely, since they're too hard to kill at similar times to prevent having to go through this. Unlike Ornstein and Smough, their clear inspiration, they don't follow the big and slow, small and nimble design philosophy. Instead, they're both incredibly quick, and the pillars don't do nearly as good a job at breaking their aggression as they did in the classic Dark Souls 1 gank fight. While I don't hate them as much as most, they're definitely not a great fight. The Shadow Tree avatar at least has an interesting concept, but I just feel all of its moves are unenjoyable to engage with. If it was a fun boss, I'd love seeing it burst back from the dead, but all I could think was, oh, I have to fight him again. Boring. There was no need to have it rebirth twice. The third phase loses all of its intrigue. It just doesn't give me any of the elements of a boss fight I truly enjoy. I dislike NPC fights enough as it is, but Ymir really takes it to the next level. His own moveset is just awful, with homing projectiles that don't really pose any threat other than being a constant annoyance, and basically nothing to defend himself at close range. Add a bunch of mindlessly dumped finger creepers in the arena, and you have a recipe for a truly irredeemable boss fight. Dear God, I'm gonna get slaughtered for this pick. I wish I could enjoy Bale's fight, as everything surrounding it is incredible. It's an immense spectacle atop the awesome jagged peak, and Egon's dialogue surrounding this boss is just so epic. Bale himself is just held back by his terrible moveset. He suffers from the same issues I have with Placidusax, in that most of his moveset is just AoE spamming. Bale does have a few more melee and projectile attacks thrown in, one of the standouts for me being his flight around the arena, shooting fireballs at the player and crashing back to the ground. That move is actually pretty cool, but most of his melee attacks I just find so unintuitive to dodge, given you have to be so close to the boss to damage him, which results in you not being able to clearly read all of his tells due to Bale's immense size. At least they did make it so the player does more damage to the head. That seems to always work for FromSoft. This boss has so much potential, but comparing it to dragon fights which focus on a simple and pure mechanical challenge, rather than overwhelming the player with huge spectacle focused attacks, is not hugely fair to me, and this just isn't my style of fight. Meta as a boss absolutely fascinated me. I was never expecting to learn more lore about the fingers in the DLC, but it becomes one of the most interesting things to discover. Meta also has an incredible visual design, and the arena being submerged beneath the sea is just so cool. Unfortunately, that's where the positives end, as I feel the fight itself isn't particularly fun. Her attacks have some strange hitboxes, especially the finger slaps from her side. It's not one I hate, but the most important thing for me in a Souls boss is that I actually enjoy fighting them, which I simply don't get with Meta. I don't think I hate Gaius as much as most of the community, but he really isn't a particularly good boss. His moveset is filled with broken hitboxes and obnoxious attacks, which just feel unenjoyable to fight. His design is relatively forgettable by Elden Ring standards, and has nothing to leave an impact on the player other than the tainted memories of how awful his moveset is. I didn't understand people's complaints with this boss the first time I fought it, but now I most certainly do. If you fight it with a summon, it's just mediocre, but attempting it without is just a mess of an encounter. I don't understand why FromSoft felt the need to add the poison mechanic, and it certainly doesn't help this boss at all. This is a perfect example of how not to do an NPC style boss. They're incredibly easy to kill individually, and together they're just a messy and mechanically bland fight. There's little of note to say about this boss, as they're more akin to a Dark Souls 2 enemy gank. What a massive downgrade from the Remembrance fight. Mohg here is dumped into a small room which he can cover with his attacks. Visually he falls so far short of his true form, and the mechanics are just kind of boring. He reminds me of the Great Shinobi Owl the way his weapon covers the entire width of the arena. My opinion of this fight may be a little tainted, since I beat the Lord of Blood first, but I just don't find anything all that worthwhile in this fight beneath Lanedale. This boss is infamous for being a lazily designed and annoying gank. It's either incredibly easy or unreasonably difficult depending on how fast you're able to kill the Misbegotten, since dealing with both bosses at once is a near impossible feat. On top of this, both these enemy types are used much more effectively at other points in the game, and placing this duo in the same area as General Radahn was never going to bode well for them. Most people will consider this a minor boss, but it can be required to reach Bale depending on your path to the Jagged Peak, and this was the path I took first. It's my video and I've chosen to include it. That said, it does fall short of most of the major bosses in Elden Ring. I don't love NPC fights generally, and while there are many that do a better job with this formula than Ancient Dragon Man, he tends to simply mash buttons and pray clips you with the edge of his sword. It's just nowhere near as engaging as a more deeply considered boss would be. I really can't stand this boss. It caps off potentially the worst region in Elden Ring, and provides yet another ankle-tripping fight against a giant. Back when Elden Ring first launched and I reached this boss on my first playthrough, I ended up cheesing him by making him jump off a cliff. I've since beaten him properly many times, and the cheese was by far the most enjoyable way I've beaten him. Yet another boss that finds himself in the bad tier due to its low difficulty. Gideon Ofnir unfortunately fails to provide an engaging encounter against one of the most significant figures in the lore of Elden Ring. He'll spam the same 3 attacks over and over, but his low vitality never fails to make him a walk in the park. This is another classic T-Star Donuts hot take, and I know I'm going to get some angry Radagon fans raising their pitchforks for this placement. His design is great, and the use of the main Elden Ring theme is a great touch, but his invisible teleportation is a terrible mechanic. It would be okay if he couldn't begin attacks while invisible, but he can start charging an attack while he's invisible, and it comes out the moment he reappears, making it basically impossible to avoid. His attacks also chain together way too fast, and I find him to have the most offensive uses of delayed attacks in the game. His Holy Slam attacks all have pretty questionable hitboxes, and the turning speed during his attacks is absurd. All these factors go together to create a fight that I don't outright hate, but find frustrating, and a perfect example of every gripe I have with Elden Ring's boss design philosophy. I know Jory is a particularly unpopular boss. I can understand that, but I don't think he's that awful. Don't get me wrong, he definitely deserves his placement in the bad tier, but there's some redeeming qualities here. Some. So let me defend my placement. Pretty much all his moves are really well designed, and feel great to interact with. I think most people have issues with the gank element of this fight, but I actually really like the enemies he chooses to summon. On their own they're great, and they actually do go well with Jory's own moveset. The problem arises when he decides to use his spiral pillar attack, which can put you into some very bad positions. At least it's not as bad here as it is on that stairway towards the end of Enir Limb. Jory doesn't do anything special, and what he does do isn't handled as well as it could have been, so I'm not a massive fan, but he's certainly not terrible. One of the earliest bosses I fought on the day of Shadow of the Erdtree's release, or should I say night, it would have been about 3 AM. The Golden Hippopotamus was definitely disappointing to me. It's the opposite of my style of fight, with janky camera galore and hitboxes that don't work much better. I actually much prefer fighting it in Night Rain, but we're not counting those fights towards this placement. The main Golden Hippo felt so inconsequential, and the gameplay didn't do much to support it, so it ended up being one of the weaker entries in that DLC. Estelle has a great arena, designed straight out of Bloodborne, and a visually appealing moveset. Unfortunately, he suffers from the Big Beast syndrome, which drags many bosses down my lists. He's just such a huge opponent, which makes it somewhat difficult to see what he's doing, and makes the fight much less engaging than it could be as a result. Niall himself is a very well designed enemy. His moveset is fun to interact with and well balanced. The fight is just held back by its opening. Seeing his spectral entourage is honestly a nice touch, but dumping 2 of the game's toughest enemies in a room with a boss just feels a little overtuned. Thankfully, FromSoft did choose to make Niall less aggressive while his buddies are alive, which saves the boss from being far lower on my list. The Grafted Scion is a boss I feel would have been better placed at a different point of the game. I believe that Vanguard Demon works better as a Force Lost boss, since fighting it on a second playthrough, players should be able to easily overcome it. In contrast, the Grafted Scion still provides a decent challenge when returning later in the game, as well as on subsequent playthroughs. The moveset isn't all that engaging, though it does at least keep players on their toes. The Elden Beast is a very mediocre boss that is incredibly underwhelming for the final boss of my personal favourite Souls game. The fight becomes such a slog since the Elden Beast spends most of the fight just swimming around the arena, but at least now the player has access to Torrent to close the distance. His moveset is somewhat passable, but Elden Stars is yet another unreasonable tracking attack to add to the pile. The fight is spectacular visually, but as a combat encounter that naturally gets compared to bosses like Ishin and Soul of Cinder, it falls far short. Fat, fatty bum, fat big fatty, fat rolling obese man. He's a solid boss fight, but the rolling attack isn't great and the rest of his moveset is relatively basic. It's just unfortunate that Round Man gets overshadowed by the far inferior Godskin duo. This boss annoys me. It really isn't that bad, but he insists on never giving the player a single healing window. This is especially frustrating since nearly all his attacks will come close to killing you in a single hit, but you can't even recover that health due to fireball spam, which gets even worse in the second phase when he decides to shove his lightning up your every orifice. By God, he makes me angry. Ending off our mediocre tier with what I know will be an incredibly controversial pick. I've seen so much praise for Placidusax as the best dragon fight in Elden Ring, but I don't agree. I find the fight to be a static drag of an encounter with little variety to it, and attacks that cover far too wide an area for how much damage they deal. In contrast to fights such as Medea and Calamite, Placidusax spends most of the fights sat in one place, hitting you with projectiles and AoE attacks that force you to back away to artificially extend the fight's duration. I appreciate the visual design and lore aspects of the fight, but bar a few select attacks, I just find it to be incredibly stale in terms of combat challenge, compared to what we'd expect of powerful winged adversaries such as this. Makar leaves more of a mark than the other Magma ones, since he can be a part of your main playthrough, if you choose to go that way to Altus Plateau. His attacks are well designed, and the fight has a good flow, though his size and long charge attack do make it a little less enjoyable, especially when he just decides to charge 5 times in a row. This is pretty much a meme placement. That being said, I do appreciate the purpose Rick serves to Elden Ring's tutorial, providing players new to Souls with a jokingly easy enemy before giving them a real boss fight in the Tree Sentinel. It's a very enjoyable fight that provides a moment of relaxed fun rarely seen in this series. The Mimic tier is all about the concept. Once again, it's a pitifully easy fight, but the idea of a boss that directly replicates the player's own equipment and abilities is just amazing. I sometimes like to go into this fight with my strongest tools equipped, and then remove my own, which provides a much more challenging fight than typical, with the easiest approach being the inverse of this method. Next up is the Cloud Treading Deer. What's that? That's the wrong game? The Ancestor Spirit has such a great design, but it's unfortunate that its attacks aren't particularly difficult or interesting to face off against. The puzzle to find this boss is a cool idea, though not all that well executed. This is an encounter brought up the list due to its spectacle, which definitely earns it this spot. This fight is more or less exactly the same as the Lesser Spirit, though it has a unique second phase and was clearly the first designed of the two, and as such lands slightly higher on my list. My favourite part of this boss may actually be the arena. It's like something straight out of Game of Thrones with a more mystical element to it, with the spectral chairs surrounding the circular pool from which Lorette spawns. Mechanically, the fight is also solid, and I enjoy a mix of ranged and melee sorceries which provide an engaging encounter overall. Similar to the variant found earlier in the game, Royal Knight Loretta has a truly standout arena. They share more or less the same attacks, with the only real difference being in their designs. I do like this version slightly more since she's a more imposing threat, though still not as difficult as the bosses found in the rest of Elden Ring's late game. This is definitely in contention for the most controversial placement on this list, but I don't think Godfrey is anywhere near the quality everyone praises him to be. I have grown more fond of him on my recent playthroughs, and think Phase 1 is a pretty good fight, though I do find most of his moves pretty dull to interact with. He's one of the more noticeable examples of delayed attacks being used to an egregious degree in Elden Ring, which definitely affects how much I enjoy the fight. Unfortunately, his second phase is a massive step down in my eyes, despite the great mid-fight cutscene. I just find Horaloo to have mostly unenjoyable or annoying moves, and I always care more about the gameplay than the presentation of the boss within these games. It just isn't a fun fight. The AoE roar is completely pointless and adds nothing to it, but most importantly, people complain about delayed attacks in Elden Ring. Horaloo's the undisputed king of delayed attacks. In most cases I don't have an issue with the delays, but here it's completely obnoxious. And who can forget his 20 hit melee combo? Just not good. The healing windows are almost as rare as in the fight against Gwyn. I don't enjoy Horaloo, so while the first phase is really good, the fight overall just doesn't hold up for me. This boss has a cousin who we'll talk about in the minor boss ranking, who frankly left more of an impression on me than the Remembrance variant, but Dancing Lion is a good boss, primarily on the conceptual level. The switching between phases reminds me a lot of Soul of Cinder, who if you watch my Dark Souls 3 boss ranking you'll know I speak highly of, but also like Soul of Cinder, some movesets are definitely more desirable than others. My main issue with the fight is just how janky it can end up being. The camera is notoriously awful, and he leaps around so much that it can be hard to get your bearings and react to to what he's doing. I do like this fight, but I much prefer calculated dual style bosses, as opposed to encounters with erratic beasts. The Putrescent Knight used to be one of my least favourite bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree, but on my most recent playthrough it really grew on me. Perhaps guard countering it is just more fun than dodging it. There were certainly a few moves where I could vividly see this was the case. While the presentation is fairly weak, especially when it's the boss tied to the incredibly significant character of Saint Trina, the visual identity is distinct and most of its moveset is fun. I don't love every move, and I'm never completely gripped in the engagement. I wouldn't love fighting the knight for hours on end like I would Ishin or R'Larna, but I'm pleased to say I have come around to this boss. While not as developed as his Remembrance counterpart, Shade Godfrey is still a mechanically well-rounded encounter. He essentially bears the moveset of the true fight's first phase, which is the far better part of the fight. What it lacks in presentation, this boss makes up for in gameplay, and as such, earns good praise in my books. Elima has one of the best designs in the entirety of Elden Ring, and one of its coolest weapons to match. That's really the main appeal of this fight. The red telekinetic magic flinging her sword around the arena is just so cool to watch. While I don't love her moveset, it's still okay, and the design of the fight is just so brilliant that it brings it up this high. And thankfully it's not quite as terrifying as the bell-bearing hunter in Night Rain. Easily the best encounter with the Red Wolf, this boss is best experienced on a first playthrough. On those that follow it just becomes too easy since its health is so low, but that first fight is pretty damn good. It's surprisingly challenging despite its low health if you aren't prepared, and its moveset is pretty well balanced. Some of his melee swipes do feel a little too fast, but I love his leaping magic sword attacks, which match his visual design. Not a perfect boss, but definitely a solid one. When I first fought R'Larna, I was absolutely blown away by the spectacle of her second phase. The reveal of the vast lake lit by the glistening blue glow of the full moon in the background is one of my favourite moments in the game, and at the time I considered it the best arena in the series. While I'm not sure I fully agree with that now, it's still one of my favourites. Her moveset is nothing overly special, though the attacks are enjoyable to interact with. Her first phase is an improvement to Deacons of the Deep, though it still becomes uninteresting on repeat attempts. Easily the best enemy-filled rune-style boss though. R'Larna isn't helped by a slightly tedious runback, especially by Elden Ring standards, but it's a distinctly enjoyable encounter that deserves its spot at the top of the decent tier. Leonine Misbegotten is honestly such an underrated boss. It has a very well designed moveset, not to mention an absolutely phenomenal arena. The biggest issue with this boss is just how easy it is to stagger. If you use the Lone Wolf Ashes, which most new players will, this boss just gets beaten into submission. Combine that with jumping attacks and a strength build, you can unintentionally end this fight in under 10 seconds. It's just unfortunate that this boss falls victim to Elden Ring's vast build variety. Many people view Rykard as the best gimmick boss in the series. While I don't personally agree, he's undeniably one of their better attempts at the Storm Ruler concept. It's an incredible spectacle, with a decent moveset to complement it. The arena and atmosphere is great, and I feel the fiery vibe of the fight adds such an interesting and fitting dynamic to this horrifying encounter. While I do enjoy this fight a good deal, I just don't engage with the moveset quite enough for him to reach the next tier up. I think Romina is massively underrated by the community. As you can see by her placement here, I don't think she's a masterclass of boss design by any means, but she's better than many give her credit for. I think this largely comes down to her being pretty easy, especially when compared with the brutal challenge most of Shadow of the Erdtree's bosses provide. But her moveset is fun to engage with, and many of her moves feel great to dodge. All her tells are fair and give you plenty of time to reasonably react to, and she even has a great AoE, a rarity in FromSoft's bosses, and bosses in general, not to mention having one of the most standout visual identities in the series, striking saturated pink starkly contrasted to the typical dark tones of the Souls genre. I really like Romina and feel her spot towards the upper end of the decent tier is definitely deserved. Oh dear, we've reached Elden Ring's most divisive boss. I was not pleased when I first saw the leaks that Radahn would be the DLC's final boss, and still wish we could have gotten something more original. I love Radahn as much as anybody, but this version falls so far short of the Star Scourge. His moveset is serviceable, and there is actually some great moves in here, but let's address the elephant in the room. The hate for Shadow of the Erdtree was not remotely justified. It got review bombed to hell simply because it was so vastly more difficult than Elden Ring's base game, which which reached a wider, less gritty audience than the rest of the series had. But it still gave you plenty of options to lessen that struggle by exploring the world, and the bosses, while hard, are for the most part entirely fair. I had no issues with Mesmer or Rolana, who took me 30 and 40 attempts respectively. I've no hit in Orishin and have never once found myself getting frustrated at Melania, but Consort Radahn just takes the mick a little bit. He's not so difficult he's fun, he's so difficult he feels unfair. And much of his moveset genuinely is. We all remember the triple sword slash that was unavoidable unless you light rolled. We all remember the excessive visuals that obscured his moveset and made the boss a complete cluster, made the game lag on PC really badly. You get the point. The player couldn't reasonably be expected to respond to everything he did. I've seen people defend him, saying, just use a shield, just use perfume bottles. Strategies like that are not a valid defense for a boss. In these games, players should be able to beat the boss with the build they've established across their playthrough, not be forced to undo it entirely. Radahn is a fight with plenty of positives, but it's dragged down so drastically by all the elements of the fight which just feel like FromSoft is desperately trying to one-up Melania. I knew they were going to give it a shot, and expected the result to be a poor boss, but it's so disappointing to see my fears realised. Obviously I still like Radahn a reasonable degree, evidenced by his placement above so many other bosses, but he's just not a great fight. Maybe he was completely fixed by the nerfs, maybe they made him fair and he's a great boss now. I wouldn't know, I haven't fought him since the DLC released. Godric is often overlooked since Margit is a much more memorable boss in the same area and poses a greater challenge, but Godric himself is a really solid boss. He has a great design, incredible phase 2 cutscene, and engaging moveset which really makes use of the different mechanics Elden Ring brings to the table. He is unfortunately the weakest of the demigods, both in lore and in terms of gameplay, and it lets him down a fair bit. I do like his attacks well enough, but I don't think it's crazy to say they aren't as well designed as bosses like Morgott or Malekith. As such, he earns a respectable placement, but doesn't quite reach the highest highs of FromSoft boss design.
You unkindled are all the same. You watch my videos every week, yet never once do you take your place to that subscribe button. You are content to let me rot atop this mountain of unclicked buttons, to let me suffer for eternities to come until every boss has been ranked from worst to best. I did not wish for it to end this way. Why couldn't you have simply subscribed?
Fortisax is wholly reliant on the presentation of the fight, being one of Elden Ring's most impressive visual spectacles. The black scales, mixture of red and gold lightning, and flashy attacks make this boss incredibly memorable. These aspects go a long way to make up for the ankle-tripping mechanics of the fight, which are a huge disappointment. It's held back further by being at the end of a long quest line in a hidden area, which makes it easy to miss. Despite this, the flawless visual design and phenomenal soundtrack make this one of my favourite Soulsborne dragon fights, despite its combat being decent at best. I always see so much praise for Midra. He's often discussed as one of Elden Ring's best bosses. People seem to absolutely love him, and I can kinda see why, to an extent, but I can't bring myself to believe that his gameplay holds up against the likes of Malekith and Mesmer. There's just no comparison. His presentation is undoubtedly phenomenal, and it's an awesome fight, but for me combat will always be the most important element of a boss, and Midra's is merely solid. His attacks do feel good to engage with and satisfying to dodge, with the frenzy status not becoming an annoyance like Elman's tend to in these games, but he doesn't bring anything to the table that other bosses in this tier do. His moveset hardly feels more complex than the Penetrator. More refined, definitely, but more advanced? Not massively. I guess I was just disappointed that such a cool boss didn't do more to impress me with its mechanics. All that said, I still think he's definitely deserving of this spot, and just barely misses out on the top 10 in Elden Ring. This wrongly accused Predator is actually a really good boss. I'm sure I don't need to mention his visual design, as it's some of the best in the series. That's paired with a solid moveset that rewards good positioning, something I always love in a Souls boss. Many people complain about his phase transition forcing you to heal rather than attack him, or use a physic to negate the damage, but for some reason I find it really adds to the fight, which is surprising given it's a mechanic I'd ordinarily hate. I think it was necessary given how overpowered some Elden Ring builds can be. Had it not been included, many players wouldn't have even seen his second phase. This fight gets a boost in the fact that Bloodflame is one of the coolest attack types in all of Souls, and all the different elements of Mohg's design go together to make a truly memorable boss. His moveset just isn't quite as excellent as those of bosses higher on the list. This may truly be the most underrated boss in Soulsborne for me. The presentation here is fantastic, with the vast cavern flowing with water and the giant throne at its heart. The frozen lightning is one of the coolest effects in the series, and it amplifies this fight so much. The Dragonkin soldier has a great moveset that's undeniably enjoyable to fight, but it's really the design of this fight that elevates it so far beyond its counterparts in the Lake of Rot and Sciothra River. The Tree Sentinel is an excellent tool for teaching players how Elden Ring works. For new players, it demonstrates that some challenges are better approached later in the game, and for the existing Souls fanbase, it highlights the differences between Elden Ring and the other games in the series. Elden Ring actively encourages exploration, though players are still welcome to persevere with the Tree Sentinel before going anywhere else. Mechanically, he's very well designed for his purpose in the game, as his moveset is simple but can pose a massive challenge for underleveled players. The Sentinel has a great design, but the appeal really is in just how well the fight serves its purpose in teaching players the various different approaches to Elden Ring's open world design. With the monumental success of Elden Ring, Margit was the first true challenge for thousands of new players. The reason he's such a great first boss is due to the lessons he teaches the player. Throughout the starting part of the game, the player is pointed towards Stormvale, but arriving there and being faced with this overwhelming obstacle left many new players unable to progress. Within the first few hours of the game, this teaches the player a crucial part of Elden Ring, far more important than in other Souls games: exploration. Margit encourages the player to go into the world and make their character stronger to surpass him at a later date, in a very similar vein to the Tree Sentinel. On top of this, the boss teaches the newer players the importance of perseverance, a part of From Software's games so heavily ingrained into their design formula. Bosses in these games are often so unbelievably difficult, and sometimes the only way to overcome them is to keep trying over and over. None of that's to take away from the combat itself. Margit's moveset is the most complex for a first boss in the series, and all his attacks feel incredibly fair and rewarding to dodge. I will admit being able to fall off the bridge while Margit can't is frustrating, but that's just another way of introducing the player to the unforgiving nature of Soulsborne games. I know most people like Morgott a good deal, but I still consider him to be criminally underrated. His moveset is so close to perfect, with his blinding speed and ability to chain combos together, and delayed attacks which I think are the most balanced in Elden Ring. The cutscene prior is also one of my favourites, and Morgott's dialogue is just so damn cool. He also has perhaps my favourite lore in this series, and I find the Omen Curse one of the most fascinating parts of Elden Ring, which has only been enhanced by Shadow of the Erdtree. He has one of the most diverse and varied movesets FromSoft have ever created, which are enhanced by the weapons of Golden Light and his flaming curved sword. He absolutely deserved to be considered with Elden Ring's best bosses, and those who disagree are willful traitors all. Radahn is the only boss I believe can rival the Soul of Cinder in terms of his presentation. He's one of the most memorable fights in Elden Ring, and FromSoft's choice to allow the option to fight him alongside so many of the NPCs you've become familiar with in your playthrough amplifies it so much. The build up to his fight is the best in the series, rivaled only by Artorias, and they're both two of my absolute favourite characters in the lore. The staging of the Radahn Festival is front and centre in every element of the fight, and that's not to mention Radahn's own impeccable design. Every aspect of his lore is told in its visuals alone, from his fall to the Scarlet Rot to his heartwarming companionship with his horse Leonard. The combat of the encounter is very high quality, and though not my personal taste, being more akin to a big beast boss than a one-on-one duel, it's so well refined and engaging that I cannot criticise Radahn for it. Fighting this boss the week of Elden Ring's release truly stands out as one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. My favourite boss from Elden Ring prior to the DLC, Malekith, is the one I was most anticipating leading up to the game's release. The trailer showcased his awesome design, red flames and acrobatic moveset, which really intrigued me as to how the boss would play out. He did certainly not disappoint, as the final result is an incredible and intense fight with one of FromSoft's coolest adversaries. Seriously, "O Death, become my blade once more" is one of the hardest quotes FromSoft have ever cooked. The fight begins with the Beast Clergyman, the weaker half of the fight, but still a very solid battle. The second phase really is its highlight, and if there was one change I could make to this fight, it would be to make phase 2 begin at 3/4 of Malekith's health, rather than 50%. The way he interacts with the arena as it crumbles around him is such a great spectacle, which meshes with the black and red flames of Destined Death, which cut down your health permanently. I don't love that mechanic, especially the ticking over time. That can make some situations really difficult to deal with, but Malekith really is the embodiment of all that's great about Elden Ring's design philosophy, and definitely deserves his spot as the second best boss in Elden Ring's base game. Malenia was Consort Radahn before Consort Radahn. She was heralded as the pinnacle of gaming difficulty, which at the time I didn't agree with, but as I've fought her more, I've realised that it's absolutely justified. She's second only to Radahn, but I love it all. almost all of it. I may as well get into it now. The infamous waterfowl dance. It is a little unfair. It's not the most well-designed move I've ever seen, but it's not nearly as bad as everyone says it is. It's perfectly reasonable for the player to avoid, at least the second two moves. I'm not going to use the plethora of cheesy strategies to defend it, but it's not all that difficult to avoid simply by rolling, once you figure it out. Again, it's not perfect, but it's not too vast a detriment to my enjoyment of what is otherwise an excellent boss. The rest of our moveset is great and provides an immense challenge that's always fair and engaging. The lifesteal mechanic is an incredibly unique touch, but I do feel the fight would have been slightly stronger without it. Melania's moveset is challenging enough as is, and her health regeneration is designed in such a way that certain builds become much less viable against her. Take shields for example, but she has some of the coolest visuals in the game, a phenomenal soundtrack and mid-fight cutscene with mechanics to boot, so she definitely deserves her spot in Elden Ring's top 3. Rolana had the potential to be higher on this list if only she'd had a cutscene to make me care more. That's not to say I don't like her lore, I think it's pretty great, but if you don't discover it before the fight, the encounter loses a lot of weight because of it. Thankfully, Rolana is both mechanically and visually incredible. Her fight feels like a blend of Pontiff Sullivan and Lady Maria, with the fast pace and combo variety of Melania. She's one of the most challenging encounters in the series, and I absolutely love it. Her design is incredible. The flaming sword aesthetic may have been done to death by now, but there's no denying that when you see it, you're in for an awesome fight. Rolana really is one of the most mechanically enticing bosses FromSoft have made, and I really feel she got the short end of the stick thanks to the discourse surrounding Shadow of the Erdtree's difficulty. While I feel those criticisms are completely justified for Consort Radahn, who even in spite of my level 1 dagger only no summon run on Elden Ring, took me around 150 attempts to defeat, Rolana's difficulty feels entirely earned, balanced and fair, and I think she's as close to perfect as any other boss, just not quite as much as the fight that surpasses her. Messmer is the poster child for the best DLC in Souls, and FromSoft definitely chose the best boss to represent it. Messmer excels in all areas. Fantastic gameplay, compelling lore, gripping visual design. It all comes together to create Elden Ring's best boss fight. His opening cutscene is chilling and enthralling, as is the fight itself, with blinding speed that requires incredibly swift reactions and precise movements. Basically every move has flame after effects to punish sloppy dodging and keep the player on their toes for the entire encounter. His second phase is just as strong, the snakes having frenzied hitboxes, but none of the jank of the snakes from Bloodborne's Shadows of Yharnam. He's one of the hardest bosses in Souls, and it all feels incredibly fair and earned. Messmer is the high point of Shadow of the Erdtree, and definitely deserves to be among the best of the best in FromSoft boss roster. Wow, that was a long one. To anyone who watched all the way, I've sent you 20,000 runes as a token of my gratitude. I know it's not a lot, but it's all I can afford. If you want to help me send my viewers more runes in the future, drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and leave your own thoughts on these bosses below, in a respectful manner of course. That way you'll stay up to date on all my future boss rankings, like the Elden Ring minor boss video I've got coming next, and I'll be encouraged to keep producing more of them. It's a win-win. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me for the pseudo part 2 of this video next time.